Hi. Welcome to the Eugene Public Library's Windfall Reading Series. My name is Matt Torres, and I want to thank you all for coming tonight. Thank you also to our sponsors, the Lane Literary Guild and the Friends of the Library. Before we get started, I wanted to kind of address a Q&A issue. So at the end of Windfall is when we expect to have more time for Q&A. But prior to this, in comments, my colleagues will be putting my email address, as well as I'll be put down a phone number as well if you prefer to contact by phone. But email is the best way to submit a comment and the question to me ahead of time if you're not able to post anything in YouTube. YouTube is definitely the best way, but some people don't have YouTube accounts, so we wanted to get that talk about that a little more at length, about the best ways to reach us for that Q&A session at the end. Also, I want to, at this point, just thank you again for making Windfall Reading Series the success that it is. Even in this transition of doing it virtually, it's so awesome that we're all here together doing this. And I hope this is as successful as it's been in our past Windfall Reading Series. And at this time, I want to turn it over to Henry Alley with Lane Literary Guild, and he will present our first reader. So one moment while I put Henry on our screen, okay?
Thanks a lot, Matthias, and I'm very happy to be here, and I very much appreciate being part of the Lane Literary Guild. I was around in 1984 when Ingrid Wendt and Bill Sweet put it together, and it has been going in a sustained way ever since. I was president of the Guild in 1986 and then again in 2018. So I have a kind of sustained relationship to this guild. Our Windfall series has been going for a number of decades, and we are very proud to feature distinguished poets, writers in pairs. And tonight we're very much graced by two poets east of us, and that's made possible, of course, and facilitated by the fact that we can do it as a virtual experience. So tonight, I wanted to introduce both Melissa Kwasny and Christopher Howell. And Melissa is our first reader, and she has been named Montana Poet Laureate for 2019 to 2020, a position she is sharing with M.L. Smoker. Her recent poetry collection is Where Outside the Body is the Soul Today. She says, most of my poems address in some way our human relationship to the non-human world and my own attempt to forge a communication and conversation with it. Recently, I read one translation of the Chinese character for poetry might be words laid upon the earth altar. I like to think of my work like that. Kwasny has published 5 additional books of poetry, a collection of prose writings, earth recitals, essays on image and vision, and she edited Toward the Open Field, Poets on the Art of Poetry, 1800 to 1950, and co-edited I Go to the Ruined Place, Contemporary Poets in Defense of Global Human Rights. She recently published a book of investigative nonfiction, Putting on the Dog, The Animal Origins of What We Wear. The recipient of many awards, she has taught widely, including currently at Carroll College and Lesley University. I want to say, too, that Melissa was originally going to read for us earlier last year, but then because of all the changes, she wasn't able to. But because she was going to, I acquired 2 of her books, Reading Novalis in Montana and Thistle. And I just wanted to share with you a phrase that struck me so much when in Thistle, in the poem Yarrow, she writes, though I want to be like you, fresh, a swath of healing. I thought that was such a striking image. And then on the back of the book, our other reader, Christopher Howell, wrote a tribute to this collection because it won the Idaho Prize and he was the final judge. It says, Melissa Kwasny's poems are so exact in their movement and presentation, so fresh in their botanical and observatory language, they invoke for the reader with aching clarity what it would be like to be brave enough to touch both the inner and outer worlds simultaneously and with identical honesty and care. There is a weird, luminous parallax too, that descends as one reads these poems, as though the spirits of Hopkins, Dickinson, and Elizabeth Barrett Browning had combined to possess a poet with postmodern perspective and craft. And so one sees and enjoys anew the great tradition of meditative poetry in our language, a gift of staggering proportions. It is difficult for me to express my admiration and enthusiasm. And it's a delight to me that Christopher Howell and Melissa Kwasny know each other and feel that their poetry mutually inspires each other. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Melissa Kwasny.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you to the Eugene Public Library and the Lane Literary Guild for inviting me. Delight is the word I would use for being able to read with Christopher Howell. He selected my second book, Thistle, for the Idaho Prize in 2005 or 6. That's how I got to know him. After he had selected it, a mutual friend told me that I should meet him, and we've been. His friendship I cherish, and probably his poems even more. One of my favorite poets. Tonight, I would like to read from my latest book of poems, which is called "Where Outside the Body Is the Soul Today." And this book, which asks that question, which is an odd question, but starts out with the idea, what is the soul anyway? The idea for this book came from a poem, well, 2 poems actually by Christopher Howell. One called He Writes to the Soul, and then another one called Another Letter to the Soul. And he's never been angry at me for stealing his idea. I thought it was the most wonderful idea that you could write a poem to the soul. Because first of all, you have to ask, what is it? Do you believe in it? And what would you say? What if you were writing a letter? And he does these a beautiful job in both those poems, and probably has written many since then. But that became the project of the book, thinking about the soul, reading about it. So there are a lot of poems within my book called Another Letter to the Soul. But I'd like to start with a tribute to Chris by reading his poem, Another Letter to the Soul. I think you are among the flowers that spill from walls and urge the hummingbirds to drink and drink from their fantastic hair. Each day I believe more firmly in this life of yours, among the brilliance that thrusts and blooms on into the blue foyer of the sun. In this way, I understand my own flowering, as your shadow left advisedly against the noise of loneliness, which would otherwise be your absence. God love you more than dust, I pray, to the fireball lastness of descending light, and keep you steady while the world sways on its pins. Shattered rock and silver rings, music of the vibrant wood itself, how much matters and by how intricate a moon. I have put off from shore to think these things, the wind right aft, the sail and blossom, toward the godly open certainty that you are with me still and joyful, as the small, doomed, brightly painted boat that I must be. So as I said, I took up the challenge, and the book is divided into 2 parts. One part are all these letters to the soul that are prose poems. And I'd like to read the first 2. Another Letter to the Soul. You are the story of my love in ruins, the garden I planted in what was left of the concrete. You are the back step of childhood, mother and father so absorbed in each other, their children were like ants, got into the kitchen, a nuisance, an insignificant grief. Let me start there. My pilot light, you led me out. I recognized you first in the side yard, in the hard-packed solitude where the roses grew. In my long adolescence, you taught me to bear the heavy self, like carrying loads in one's arms of wet laundry. But what are your attachments? I feel as if I belong to you, but you belong to something else. You are older than me, wiser, more well-connected. What now? I know I keep asking. What should occupy me in these last days? Day air in the clearing, lifelong friend of trees, it is possible that you direct the full itinerary, arboretum of the unclaimed versos of the leaf. As I started thinking about the soul and looking for it, one thing that the book made me realize was that I often found the soul paradoxically outside myself. I could see it in other people. I could see it in nature. This is the second one. You picked me from the litter as a brightness, rubbed me between finger and thumb. You placed me and the bees who are like spirits came. You gave them, through me, a place to come to. You provided me with properties, inaudible spells, invisible arrows that point to the hurt places. Illness of my friends, her failing liver, his failing nerves, earth drought, flood, the poisoned animal. I know you have been testing me, first toughening the fragile frame. Inside, an infant cries and objects. You kept me apart like the bald eagle found floundering in the river and put into the feeding cage, long enough to gain its strength back, and then it fled. I admit I didn't know that a broken wing could right itself. I forget about healing, though I grow fonder of birds, the poor nieces I can afford to bring the berries to. Sun's out, you say, serving its broth of light. The second part of this book is what I refer to myself as the people poems, places, non-human forms of life where I distinctly felt what could be called the soul. So I have a lot of poems called the deer people, the blue heron people, the lake people, wind people. This one is called August Deer. Skill at sighting animals develops in the mountains. A shift in magnetism, a displacement of air. Melon texture turned temperature and under brightness, as all creatures can sense the gaze of another. If you want to see ghosts, look down the long valley at dusk. This is also when the waters begin to talk. Shimmer, the rhyme between given and again. What can I find in the shadows there? To work as a direct expression of inner calling, not the material, but material, the inherited talents, pacing of the deer, excluding panic, mastery of transition, pause, when we go no further. Quieted, enigmatic, as in not having to explain, like a breeze not wishing harm to anyone. Their gentleness, their watery light, their sleep that is itself relief from sleepfulness. The deer stand at the field edge in the shallow colors of dawn, having browsed there, having clearly intervened. I'd like to read two of the poems in the last section of Another Letter to the Soul. One, just because it feels like this is something I think about a lot right now. The soul of our time, the soul of our country, the soul of our community, and what I feel mostly right now is soul stress, and some of you probably do too. Probably most of you do. So this starts out with that idea, another letter to the soul. Soul stress, the clanging of a bell in the strong winds of the Eastern Front, or an avalanche in the snowmobile exhaust's wake. The weather unchaining, a slow coming apart, hairline cracks widening in the base. Over the phone, my friend's breathing sounds ragged, evaporative, as if he were thinning to air. My soul is dizzy, he says. What to call this? Precarious structure, like the soil disintegrating in the rain. Weakness, pathopsychology. There is horror in what humans do. And the sensitives, those like you, whose hands sometimes tremble, who have no spleens, having lost them in the accidents of childhood, suddenly see auras and must sit down. Just beyond the normalcy of everyday life, the flammable face of the world, the mind at the edge, just an organ, its bluster and dying down, its retina a shattered piece of glass. And here is kind of the title poem. Where in the body is the soul today? Anatomy, not astronomy. Look this morning at the deer sleeping on its side in a pile of leaves. Put yourself there, under the stars, protected really from nothing, having to trust the air, or gray solitaire on the bare branch of the extreme cold, where outside the body is the soul today. It will seem as if it is happening all around you, as if the sun had moved into a new phase. Pale, breathless, a bottomless blue, a sentimental crochet of clouds at the edgework. The woman who made her friends promise not to parade her in public after she lost her mind found such joy in the choir that they were torn, which is a feeling you have forgotten. Hope, one might say, the tilting that is change on the axis. If there is someone in the wind, there is someone in the mountain. If the soul is back there in the child that was harmed, it is also in the older girl who takes her hand, leading her through burning trees which breathe out emeralds. So I'd like to read some new poems. They're fairly recent, and this first one, I was helping a friend move a big stained glass piece down the road to another building, two of us, one on each side, and so precarious and so ready to just, anything could make this a disaster. And it was right when the shutdown happened in March, and the roads were slippery, icy here in Montana. And it wasn't until I was almost through with the poem that I realized that it was a metaphor. And that's how I love metaphors to work, is that they actually just, they are real life. So this is called The Week of Moving Glass. Did we breathe as we did it, focusing on our feet and the ice that sometimes softened into mud? Old, we felt the strain, our waists twisting in odd pain in order to face each other and still walk. So many dangers we didn't speak of, though we each had our list, a slip, a corner hitting a door jamb, but worse was getting lost in the view. Sky underfoot is what it felt like, a tilting as if I were in a plane, clouds in blue in a panic at being captured. If the piece were round, it would have been more difficult. We slid our fingertips beneath an edge, then edged them in until we palmed it at its waist, like one might do for an ill person trying to stand. I wonder how many rocks I will throw in the river for each of my dead a year from now. Ground glass, they say, settling in the lungs. Glass in its plural form, what we drink from or wear to see, mirror or window, what we use to see outside the self. I am already dreaming about ways it could cause harm, to shatter, to sliver, to sever, a sibilance that makes me clench my teeth. We close our eyes, try to still ourselves, balance on our rope, extra arms poling as if they were wings, hoping we meet no cars, encounter no wind, only grace and retrospect after we lower it to the floor. Stained glass in which the color of everything is now absorbed, suspended, an act of death defying. Let's see. So this is called Glass Vocabulary. It has glass vocabulary in it. I just started, somehow all these poems started coming about glass or glasses, losing glasses. You'll notice the vocabulary in this. Glass vocabulary. Clear footpath of the goddess lined with travertine, a stone the color of eggshell boiled with onion skin, and rippled glass that we, born in the industrial age, get to see at last, the sky unmitigated. What does it mean to dot your I's and cross your T's for those too young to write by hand? We, in a high-risk category, fell in love on this land, cattle-beaten juniper and the driest crumble of sage, under a smaller sky swirled with silver winds. The trodden mud has hardened after their lumbering, fractured and annealed. The spring reaches only this far in spring. If we never make it back to Rome, the black-shawled women, the flower market, the mosaics and tiles, it will be okay. As we leap back and forth across the trickle to avoid the gray dead limbs, you are already making alternate plans. What private land to ask permission to cross? What trails within our sphere? Village life after a lifetime of travel. Last night on my way to your house, an old friend appeared at the gate asking, "Silver apples of the moon, the golden apples of the sun?" Yes, Yeats, but which poem, she wanted to know. And maybe this is all that's asked of us, or all that we might ask, that the book opens to the poem, that the mind finds its way, not to a screen, but to a different kind of proficiency. We grind blue seeds of juniper under our shoes, cow bones bleach in the creek, broken and scattered. You say you like to revisit places, to come back to them over and over again. Whoever you are with now, the news analyst says, is who you will be with for the long run. Glassed in behind the tempered, the beveled, the opalescent or float glass, it is grief for the fragile world that we wake to together. While a solitaire sings at the tip of a tree, the song of the horned lark is invisible to me. We are older, more careful. A day may be lost. Instead, we remember to return to draperies of earth that hide in their folds, the young streams, rear flank of an animal we startle. And one last poem. This poem is it's been, besides the pandemic and the fires and everything else, my mother has been failing and I've flown back to see her a number of times. So that comes in. This poem that is about going to see the snow geese who come to Freeze-Out Lake in Montana every equinox, and hundreds of thousands of them. And it's kind of a pilgrimage that I like to do every year because it's really quite one of the most beautiful things you can see. So this is called the Snow Geese Path. We follow the loosely strung pearls of a necklace flung against the sky, as if out of vision, faint at first, then gaining dimension, as if they were conjured, a magic trick unraveling from the horizon, indecipherable scripts that hold just long enough to be form and break apart, terrorized by premonitions. Our eyes are heavy from seeing, the geese lift them, a kind of speech. We feel doomed, my brother said, from across the country. We're trying to keep mother safe. Somebody still has to go out for groceries. Last night, I dreamt the word round, as in round table, and then as noun, a round of poker or antibiotics or drinks or song, verb, to round the number to the highest. 100,000 snow geese circle barren fields. 100,000 people have now died of a virus. We walk between two lakes, one still frozen, one with open water where buffleheads dive, while overhead snow geese float without seeming to flap their wings. A fly line or ellipses extended, a distant roar that could be their hunger or happiness. And then it is over, only blank sky, as if disappearance were the opposite of infection. I mean, the blue above us seems saturated, the bluest I have ever seen, as if sky were being cleared of our inheritance. A blue like in the old stories about a people who survive. My mother long enough to die with me beside her, my brother to gain a lucky life. Thank you.
For such a moving reading, and I just again want to thank you for coming, and also to remind our audience out there that you can turn in questions to either or both of our readers, and they will attempt to address them at the end of this reading. I also want to remind you that you can find out more about the Lane Literary Guild and the Windfall series by visiting our website, lanewriters.org, which is our Lane Writers Network. And you'll find there a spotlight on some of our members, and you will find also not only information about the Lane Literary Guild and the Windfall series, but also find out other literary events that are going on in the Lane County area. So, and we really appreciate Sherry Welburn's work on that. All right, so I'd like to now introduce Christopher Howell, and I want to say that he is the author of 12 collections of poems, including the recent The Grief of a Happy Life. And describing it, Yusef Komanaka said, "The book feels and reads like a gift. Each healing song takes lyrical twists and turns and arrives at an abiding truth. A blessed ransom paid to soil and sky, body and soul to the earth. Every vowel is weighted, every leap earned, and the sway of hope drives the natural music of a worthwhile journey." Christopher Howell's other works include Love's Last Number, Gaze, Dreamless and Possible Poems, new and selected, And widely published, he has been honored with the Washington State Governor's Award, the Washington State Book Award, 2 National Endowment Fellowships, and many other fellowships and awards, as well as being included 3 times in the annual Pushcart Prize collections. A military journalist during the Vietnam War, since 1975 he has been director and principal editor for Lynx House Press and is now also director for Willow Springs Books. Christopher Howell teaches on the faculty of Eastern Washington University and Eastern Oregon University. And I just want to say, too, that I attended a reading when Chris earlier was here in Eugene a number of years ago at our Eugene Public Library, and was very much moved by his reading. And I wanted to just, again, this phrase that's in his collection, his most recent collection, The Grief of a Happy Life, the soul's unlisted number. That's a wonderful phrase. And I very much encourage you out there to actually order these books that I've mentioned, not only by Chris, but by Melissa. And we'll be giving the Tsunami Books contact phone number very soon. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Christopher Howell.
Thank you very much, Hank. And thanks to the Lane Literary Association, to the Windfall series. It's a pleasure to be back, and it's a great pleasure to be reading with Melissa, whose work is, I think, really monumentally wonderful, which is to say that it arranges the kind of dance between the outer world and the inner life, which I think is a kind of a priceless gift. It's the priceless gift of great art. And I would like to read one of her poems, since turnabout is fair play, to begin my reading. It is called The Ice-Lit Upper World. The tree emits a sound like a tiny silver bell. The tree fills with cedar waxwings. The tree is lightning struck, the birds just silhouette. The tree bends in the most improbable wind song. Late summer again. The fires burning inside the houses. They paint out the yellow bloom of sage against the snow. Despite my maturity, there is something girl-like, they say, too innocent about me, which means I'm not interested in having sex with them. High in these mountains, the skies have a sheen. Clouds pass as if skating on ice. I'm content to transform them into a handful of inner life. I move slow because of the red wine. My father, who has the devil in him, has tried everything to get him out. I write him letters and decide not to touch. Wet underslope of the boulder, dry foreskin of a leaf that fits my thumb. Although I am not particularly good, animals trust me. Birds show me their wings. To step into the world, I found a word, viridescence. It means to be illuminated, green. All night, the brown and speckled hawks fly above my sleep. There is only one small unhappiness to do with love. The whole poem, it seems to me, is organized against keeping that last line at bay. And then when it comes, it breaks your heart. It's wonderful writing, and I treasure it. I'll begin with a poem from Love's Last Number. It's called As Though Prayer. As though nothing mattered, I pray for an indefinable relief, a tree, for instance, out of the arms of which anything might step, restored, or a blue boat waiting at the margins of a pond no one has seen for 300 years. I pray for angels and all things that cannot exist, that they enter the room behind me and still be there when I turn. Even their likenesses will do. I pray for the ache that keeps me and the staircase of that keeping. I pray for the soft recumbrance of moss, that memory not desert this. I pray for the violin I imagine in an attic on the edge of a broken Kansas town where wind scours the paintless barns leaning and empty in the fields, that it be found by a child, all angular softness and hands a tremble. I pray for the lamplit bus stop and the sour green apple left beside a book in the shadow of my left arm 30 years ago. I pray for my daughter under the grass. I put my head in my hands. I pray for my hands and the work thereof. I pray for my soul, though it may not matter, though the line is dead in the sky, within me falling dark and starless, a huge crow contending there with God's emptiness or God's hopeful and faraway gleam. The limits of mercy. It was tough Tony born, strutting in the ring again, having thrown gorgeous George over the turnbuckle into the third row in a great clattering roar of smashed folding chairs. Beside me on the couch, my grandmother shook her head and made a disapproving sound with her lips. Tough Tony beat his chest. As his vanquished foe struggled to climb back through the ropes, he took hold of that cascade of broom-colored hair, lifted like the citizen holding up King Louis's head beside the guillotine, and gave George's face a well-placed knee. "Oh," my grandmother said, "mercy." Then we reached into the blue bowl between us for more popcorn. Perfectly accurate description. Friday Night Wrestling in Portland in the 1950s. This poem is called Voice, and it is for Madeline DeFries. The last horse on the place was Ronnie, blind, lame, and sweetly slow as a memory in which you lean back, looking at the sky. He could still plow between the berry rows, but had to go home for lunch and then for sleep beside the 32 Oldsmobile in the gray, flat-roofed barn. In my dreams, he is huge and bright as heaven, high-stepping down Stark Street, called Baseline then, bearing me straight and proud through Russellville, the village that no longer is. He's not spavined, knock-kneed, and ragged, not dead for more than 60 years. Sometimes before sleep or after, I feel his muzzle soft against my face, and someone calls to me out of the dark. This is the first poem in The Grief of a Happy Life, and it's the segment of a 10-poem sequence called Theologia. And yeah, I think like Melissa, I'm kind of captivated by the concept of the soul, that sense of something in yourself that is primary and at the same time, in some ways, perhaps more than yourself. So it's called Beyond Theology, the Soul. Beyond theology, the soul walks out into the morning's mist and roses and huge dreaming sycamores, and slips a robe of leaves over its bony shoulders as if to trade some of its solitude for a little warmth, a little bit of the old earth that has forgotten it. When a fire truck rushes by on the way to a catastrophe, The soul bows and enters the useless dance of sympathy, remembering Rome, Chicago, the great blaze of Herculaneum. When small birds mistake it for a tree, it makes the exhausted north wind sound and takes them in and feeds them those tiny seeds the dry leaves have hoarded all winter in their broken skin, as though they were children, their faces peering into the snow from dark windows. As the moon goes by and the clouds pass like centuries of houses and roads and great armies whose souls are dented rust and who, therefore, brim with sorrows and have only themselves to blame. Crickets and katydids carve in air the soul's unlisted number and the shapes it might in a rush of joy assume, paying forward what the bent coin of flesh cannot afford to know. We are the guest within us, always, that we be not without habitude or solace, that we be not only what we have done and failed to do. And this is a newer poem called Bread Upon the Waters. Under a pile of documents, old books, and clothes of no use to anyone, I found my father's casting reel, still snug in its velvet bag inside the box it came in, its perfect chrome crank and spindle gleaming like treasure uncovered in an Egyptian tomb. It cost him almost more money than he had, and then for decades, up to his neck in children and work, he barely touched it, so that it became a promise, someday maybe, a little 12-foot runabout and a one-room place by a small lake with trout. Someday, if everything broke just right, which everything seemed disinclined to do. The Bill of Rights, Hammurabi's Code, English, common law, nothing protected a man's luck. But when it was almost sundown, he managed to buy the boat, retrieved the reel from its box, and for his last years, when the weather was fine, sallied forth upon the nearby lakes and rivers with a kind of peaceful gratitude and caught nothing, mostly, but shimmering and elusive time, and returned home with it as though that were the real prize. And this is a sort of a variation of the Villanelle form that came to me one night as advertised. It's called Dark Night, Newport, 4 a.m. The lighthouse lamp goes starry and goes dark. The sea will not forbid itself the shore. Listen, you can hear the dog star bark, louder than it ever barked before. You lie awake and count yourself again and find that more is less and less is more. Where you are is where you've always been. The sea will not forbid itself the shore. What loneliness compels you to arise and touch the broken edges of the dark? Is it greater than the loneliness of skies? Listen, you can hear the dog star bark, louder than it ever barked before. Your life falls into blackness like a spark. The sea will not forbid itself the shore. The lighthouse lamp goes starry and goes dark. The next poem is a prose poem, and some of you may be familiar with at least part of its content or its reference anyway. I don't know. I discovered that this book that I'm referring to in the poem has a kind of following of people online, so it could be that some of you are in that number. The poem is called The Party of the First Part. When I was small, my favorite book was about a family of field mice tormented by a bear named Mr. Squashywall Flat. Every time the mice would find a good house in a corn crick, say, or an old bucket, Mr. Squashywall Flat would come and sit on it, smashing it to smithereens or straws. He tormented other animals as well in the neighborhood, flopping down on their houses with a great satisfied grunt, seemingly transported with happiness at having brought more ruin into the world, filling it with tired and terrified refugees. But one day the Papa Field Mouse found an old bus tire at the edge of the field. He thatched and caulked it and moved his family in secretly, hoping the mad bear would not discover this new dwelling. Of course he did discover it. And roaring with delight, he leapt high and came pile driving down on the tire with his enormous backside. But he bounced. The tire was not destroyed. Over and over he attacked the rubber house and was each time more frustrated than before. At last, filled with shame, utterly defeated, he went off to find something more frail and likely. Of course, the tire was huge, providing much more space than the mice could use, so they invited other creatures to live there as well, and Mr. Squashywall Flat, bereft of victims, left the meadow and was never seen again. I loved the story, but the moral was unclear. Evil is fundamentally stupid. Happy accidents eventually wait upon the good. Domesticity wins out over delight. Rubber is the ultimate blessing. I liked the mice, of course, and cheered that victory, chance, and persistence had brought them. But to this day, I think too of the cruel and stupid bear, lumbering off with his idiot loneliness into the dark wood. I come here in the morning, where no news enumerates the executions and the top hats do not dance. I come here to escape the garage-like life, the door to its satisfactions going up and down, the various lawn care implements gabbling away, singing about legendary states of green, the persistent color of our money. I come here for the sake of my toes that are tired of treading the crowded path, that rosebush river masking the moral tyranny of whatever must be done. And when I'm here among the geese and pigeons, I forget to weep for all the corporate death with its careful record keeping, its fattening of hogs in 4x6 enclosures and force feeding them with a hose. When I'm here, I practice my pirouette and pretend to twirl plates on my stick-like fingers as imagination discovers Bakunin in bed with Joan of Arc, and Aquinas says to God, "To think of the vivid countenance of grace just kills me. I lose track of the score, but go ahead and putt." Again and again, I compliment the soul's warmth on my neck, reminding me of Virgil, happy and lolling under house arrest, a saint of happy dismay, idly resupposing Troy and Carthage, and those dark spirits under the sea. What might Rome not have been without them? I can hear an old redness in the trees, my hands moving strangely in response as I lift and ride a little breeze off the river where the stones and white ripples embrace, which is what I do now, though I am alone with nothing but time between me and the great black star-shot sky up beyond it all. And with fanciful and hermetic precision, I consider my shoes that were hand-me-downs, looking a little tired and trying to say, rest. So I turn out my pockets and let the dreams escape and imagine myself in the old train station in Portland where I used to go for coffee and an argument with Rudy, the newsstand guy who thought most war wasn't really that bad. Where an age ago, I went to catch the train north to see that woman I loved and whom I will not see again in this life or the next. What can be done about anything? I lounge on this bench in sunlight, my life beside me, nudging, trying to pass me a note in which I am described as a gleaming pewter bowl, recently emptied of everything but a small blue crow, voiceless with joy because of his color, and because I have grown so old and contain so much. Okay. Each night, an opera house. It's got two sections. I'll kind of pause between them. Nijinsky wakes up in the grave and does a little pearl-like dance for the amusement of the great crystal spider that claps and claps like a galaxy calling its children home. Some kind of tide brushes the face of his uniform, and the footlights come up. He dances, deliberately quiet as a lake somewhere, wishing all of Paris awake again, dumbfounded by the alien bloom of his body turned to music, a kind of lonely happiness frightening a room, its arms becoming wings again, joining the dead swans in their millions. Each night is an opera house no one knew was there. Centuries step away from the wall, and Nijinsky braces them as if what lives there were a kind of forgetting, reborn with each elegant step into the darkening air. Is this a homecoming? His twirling gray garments answering a whistle like the doomed legions who will go over the top in that war that will rage and end finally nothing but itself. Impossibly again, among the vanished crowds and their cheering, he begins to consider his descent. Will he lilt down like a leaf, topple like a tower thrown down by a giant's mad despair? As always, much is unexplained. For instance, dreaming this exactly, we might wonder if we, the earthbound, do not also have the right to spring, so to speak, even as we wonder at his sailing, arms outstretched as if to grasp a rose in midair, a dreamed kingdom between love that has broken down and a heaven that, though empty, might still be there. And this is called Nighttime. And I don't know that there's much to say about it. You know, you kind of hope that the poems speak for themselves, so that you don't have to go into a long explanation about them, where they come from, what you were thinking. I have no idea what I was thinking. I was trying to connect with the poem, which is not exactly a form of thinking. It's more a form of dreaming, actually. Nighttime. Though it was dark and the curtains drawn, I could feel the snow in fields behind the house and the wind asking to come in. Awake in my bed by a small window, I imagined the moon out beyond the orchard, trying to speak or flutter one of its tourmaline eyes at our scarecrow slow dancing on his stick, miming crucifixion or possibly waving goodbye. If time was passing, it did not want anyone to know. It seemed everything slept but me, 9 years old, sharing a room with my brother, who was 3 and blonde and deep in his dreaming happiness. I wondered, as I wondered every night, what huge silent songbird would visit me, grooming its silver beak and laying open the roof to stars that night after night asked, who was I really, drifting through space in the dark? Maybe I counted to 1,000, breathing in planets and trees and the shadowy insistence of everything that wasn't there. Maybe my parents lolled in the vast prairie of the next room, like all odd beasts, suffused with distance and exhaustion. God was nearby, too, inside my thumbnail, saying his prayers, in which I was not mentioned, though also, disguised as a chair, he sat in the dark beside me, quietly counting the hours and keeping them, so that if by chance sleep found me, I should not wake and be afraid. I read this poem to close. It's called At Quartermaster Harbor, 1986. A harvest moon rose fireball orange, striking a path through which one lonely skiff rode, oarlocks thumping a bit with the irregular pull of its occupant. Dangerous out there in the dark for a small flat-bottomed craft without even a 9-horse outboard to keep it from harm. A heron squawked as its huge silhouette lifted from the shallows and rode across the moon like an example of how it should be done. On a stump above the harbor, the old elk-hound Hawken, asleep at our feet, she and I sat watching. She was 5 years old. The memory is like a recurring dream that will not stay focused, or a doorless room I long to enter. It is as though if something weren't missing in me, I could go there, and all the terrible past would be undone, and death would have no dominion, and the skiff would arrive safely on the other shore. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christopher. Thank you also, Melissa. At this time is our Q&A session. And so at this time, I'm going to bring all of our speakers tonight, Henry, Christopher, and Melissa, on screen. Henry will moderate any questions that he sees in our YouTube feed. And if I get any questions in my email account, I'll also come forward with those. So let me bring everybody on to screen at this time. One moment.
Very good. Thanks so much, Christopher, for wonderful reading. And so, I will start with a question for Melissa from our audience. I'd like to ask Melissa Kwasny about the changes she noted in her writing process poems since writing Thistle and now this new collection. I adore Thistle, by the way, and then there's this addendum. More specifically, has much changed in you, how you write, or how your poems appear between these two collections? And if so, what? And if you want me to repeat that question, I can.
No, I understand. Yes. In between there, the next book was Reading Novellas in Montana, and my goal in that book was to try to, where Thistle was a very focused lyric, each poem was very focused lyric, lined. I was thinking a lot about the shorter lines and craft, and it was focused on a plant. So the form fit what I was doing. With Reading Novellas, I wanted to incorporate more things than that meditative focus on a plant. I wanted to incorporate my reading, for instance, and in my conversations with others about this relationship with nature. So the lines got longer. They had to, in order to incorporate all that. Became more conversational, and then kind of the last poem of the book was a very long poem called The Underworld, and it was all in prose poems. After that, I had been looking at a lot of prose poems, and I was reading Renee Shar, who is one of my other touchstone poets. And I loved what he was able to do with the prose poems. So then the Nine Senses was complete, and Pictograph were written with me trying to find that way that Shar could use the prose poem to move from image to thought to image, each one developing out of the other. Now this last book is a mix of line poems and prose poems.
Thank you. That great. And I have a question for Chris. As though prayer, Professor Powell, as well as all your work, so much of your musicality shines through in a way that is remarkable to me. But how do you think you developed that skill?
I suppose that you develop any skill related to writing by some form of listening, and I would say that it's not a literal listening, but a form, let's say, of acute intuition. You know, you try to hear what the sounds are doing for each other, what the rhythms are suggesting, what the stops suggest, right? And I think that most of this is not really conscious. It's something that accumulates over years of trying to write and find ways of delivering effect, delivering result in a poem, which is a much kind of, let's say, a much kind of greater event than a message, something that almost only the poem can deliver, right? That cannot really be even quite paraphrased. So I don't think that my own process in that respect is different from really any other poet. I mean, it's kind of where it all is. It's not in what you know, but in what you can discover. And much of what you discover is in some respect not literal, right? It is experiential. And that's kind of the role of the music and the poems, I think. Some of it has to do with listening to the things that you read. You know, what really moves you, and can you implement that yourself and see kind of how it feels. Even if you have to copy it, it still tells you something. So, you know, it's just decades and decades of that kind of work, reading and writing and listening.
There's a follow-up, Chris, to that question, which you were just touching on. Would you specify any specific influences that, as this person says, you might credit for the pace and tone in which your poems are written?
James Wright, I would say, has had a lot to do with my own writing with think and feel about it. The way I want my own poems to function, what I want them to deliver. So there was that, and then just a whole lot of surrealist writing, and just kind of feeling the edges, the parameters of how, let's say, how music and image can interact. I think that a lot of that's going on in Melissa's writing as well.
Very good. I have a question for Melissa. You said that you had been a resident of Montana for a number of years, and I was just wondering, does the area that you live in have a particular impact on your poems, especially with regard to this dialogue that's going on between the soul and the body? I mean, or is it simply a product of your inner world that you derive this interest?
Oh, I'm sure. I'm sure. I live in a rural place. I have the opportunity to. I feel so fortunate. Go out every day, even during this shutdown, to go out and walk for hours and hours. Most of the time, I don't see anyone. So yes, that kind of solitude, that kind of being able to go out and learn, have a relationship to beings in a particular place. That has a lot to do with it. I just love what Chris said about the acute intuition as a form of listening, and I think that for me, that I need a lot of quiet for that to happen, to be able to, Bachelard said, to think and dream at the same time. I've always loved that idea that that's what for me as a poet, that's where I want to get to, where I can do both. And because I'm a pretty solitary person, but there are so many, beings out there to be in relationship with once you just take off walking. I like that idea of what I'm doing is listening, and I've been training myself to do that, which all poets do. Like people always say, the people are born with imagination, and I think, of course, as a capacity, but it has to be developed. And I think that's what poets do, is they develop that image making, imaginal realm within themselves. So
Follow up a little bit about what you said with regard with what Chris was saying. We have a question that's very much connected to that. When one of our members of the audience says, Chris, could you say a little more about your comment, the poem's not a form of thinking, it's a form of dreaming? And I know that Melissa referred to that, but would you like to elaborate on that a little further?
Well, let's say that, it's like dreaming, certainly in the sense that the conscious mind is not necessarily driving it. I mean, it's obviously part of you is being generated by the self, but it's not what you would call rational. And I think anyone who wants to write well and do significant work, that's creative literature, is going to have to learn to trust that, that more than you think you do, that you have the capacity to make associations that on the face of them are not rational, that are intuitive, and you kind of court that. Once you understand where the really good lines in the original work comes from, then you try to court it. You try to allow it to happen. You don't push too hard with your brain. You're kind of, it's like night vision, right? It's like what they taught us in the Navy, right? On watch, you're not supposed to look directly at what's out there in the dark. You can't see it that way. You have to use the iris, not the pupil. And I don't know. I've thought about that ever since, and for the last, whatever it's taken, 50 years, I suppose. And I think you're always developing that capacity. It's never completely developed, right? It's always a matter of process. It's a project. So it's something that I tell students, never to be discouraged. Finally, perhaps they just haven't really made contact with their ability to activate the relationship with their intuitive selves. That's possible. It sounds a little kind of new agey. I don't mean it to sound that way. I think it's a good deal firmer than that, actually. Since there's this other process involved, at the writing itself, right? It's not just a matter of interiority. It's also a matter of responding to what comes to you physically in the act of writing.
All right, thank you very much. I just want to check in with Matthias and see if there's any additional question you were fielded, or we're getting, I know, toward the end of our reading session here. We can't, I think you're muted.
Yeah, there's nothing coming through on my email feed.
Okay,
I
all
just
right.
see a lot of comments that I'm sure we all see a lot of comments that appreciate the readings that Singers.
Yes, and I would encourage both of our readers to visit on YouTube and see the marvelous responses you've gotten while you were reading. And again, I want to remind people, if they would like to buy Chris's or Melissa's books, to visit the website for Tsunami Books. And I want to put a special plug in for independent bookstores, which are unfortunately a vanishing breed, but they have hung in there marvelously here in Eugene, and they have also provided space for our critique groups and support for readings. So please do frequent the Tsunami website, or give them a call. Their phone number is 541-345-8986. And again, I want to thank both of our marvelous readers tonight, and thank you for supporting the Lane Literary Guild. And I want to also thank Matthias, because he's been on vacation, and he came in just to be our host here, and we really appreciate that as well.
Thank you, everybody, for participating, all the readers and everybody that's watching at home. Thank you very much, Henry. Thank you, Christopher.
All right, good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night.